welcome to the Manpowergroup Lab here at Vivatech. Now, in order to grow and remain competitive in today's business world, companies must make diversity and inclusivity a priority. But getting there means utilizing effective methods of recruitment, and that doesn't necessarily start with the traditional CV anymore. More and more, employers are using artificial intelligence to aid in the hiring process. But in order for AI to become an effective recruitment tool, it must be designed to help get rid of human bias, not contribute to it. To learn more, I'm joined by Amorro-Premuzic, Chief Innovation Officer at Manpowergroup. Hello, Thomas.
Hi, Colette.
How are you doing?
Good, and you?
I'm good.
Okay.
So first, how can having a diverse and inclusive staff set businesses apart from the rest? Why is diversity so important in the workplace? That's maybe an obvious question, but let's talk about it.
It might seem like an obvious question, but I think the answer is probably more complex than we intuitively think. And I think historically, there were two main arguments for diversity. You had the moral argument, which I think people will understand, and then there was the business case argument. And historically, they were almost in opposition, or there was a tension, people who were concerned by the moral argument and who, wanted more social fairness and justice found the business case distasteful. Why do we need to look for a business case? And people who worried about the business case said, we for-profit organizations didn't care so much about the moral case. What's interesting today is that both have become conflated. You will not attract talented people unless you have and you are able to showcase some basic ethical standards, which will inevitably include diversity and inclusion. And if you want to have a successful business, you need to understand that the essence of business effectiveness or performance is team effectiveness. And the only way that you can have an innovative, a creative team or a high-performing team is if you can unlock human diversity and enable a group of people who don't just look differently but also think differently to become something that is a cohesive and highly functioning unit.
And so how do traditional hiring processes make this difficult?
In many ways. First, almost every traditional hiring process conflates demographic information in the input data that you take. So, if you look at somebody's resume, it's very easy to identify their gender, their social class, what demographic groups they belong to. Of course, the number one method to recruit people is still the interview, whether that happens on Zoom or in person. It's impossible to suppress or eliminate demographic information from the interview. I might be an open-minded recruiter who has spent a lot of time being trained on, D&I and how to debias his hiring. But when I look at you, I cannot forget that you are female, that you are French, and all these things, that you are rich or whatever. So I think what has changed in the last 10 years is that we are now trying to reduce the incidence of these variables. Most organizations want to improve their D&I. They know how to measure improvements in representation or demographic representation in management, leadership, etc. But we still don't know the how. And the how, in our view, is to reduce the influence that human intuition has and enhance that intuition with data. And AI comes to the picture by doing some of the work that needs to happen before you assess candidates, by ensuring that there's better representation, by ensuring that you're looking for talent not just in the obvious places, but much further away and in more unusual places that you typically have done. And that's how you get more diversity. You then still need to ensure that when you hire people who are different, they are treated well, they're treated fairly, and that's inclusion is a leadership issue, it's not an AI issue.
Right, so we're talking about the front end of the hiring process, obviously, before we get to the interview. So what are some of the ways that AI tools can be used to get rid of bias?
So, first to, kind of demystify AI in human capital, mostly we're talking about algorithms. Algorithms are recipes to make sense of data and find patterns in the data. And the only thing novel about AI, machine learning or neural network kind of algorithms is that they can teach themselves to find these patterns, right? So if you optimize some of these algorithms to say, I want to look for somebody who has the right personality, who displays the right values, who has the right skills, but I'm not going to pay attention to their gender, their ethnicity, their social class, then algorithms can do this very well. You can even train AI, you can punish the algorithms if they're actually taking as input some information that might be conflated with social class, with gender, etc. So that when the algorithms train themselves to find for the right skills, the right talent, the right potential in a database, they will 100% of the time ignore any information that is conflated with some demographic information that you don't want to take. You can also, which is more controversial, but you can also say if there are two candidates that look the same from a skills perspective, from a talent perspective, or from a knowledge perspective, you weigh higher, you score higher somebody that comes from an underrepresented group. Right? Mm-hmm. It's controversial because a lot of people might think, well, isn't this positive discrimination or affirmative action? But it might be. Let's not forget that there's a lot of hidden or invisible or implicit affirmative action that exists in the world of work today when people who aren't more talented are given these jobs. So, what we're trying to improve on is the status quo. We're not aiming for perfection. We want to increase diversity inclusion vis-a-vis the status quo.
So maybe we can go into a bit more the challenges to automating inclusion.
Yes, the main challenge is that the vast majority of organizations, for the vast majority of jobs, and especially jobs in the knowledge economy, are not very good at measuring job performance or value added in a reliable and objective way. Which sounds crazy, right? But I think there is this paradox whereby the more skilled your job is, the more educated you are, the more you get paid, and the fancier your job title, the harder it is to actually know whether you're doing a good job or not. I would say this goes all the way to president of a country, because when you have so many conflating variables and there's so many we all hear CEOs say that during their tenure the company improved profits by 20% because of them, despite of them, and this happens at all levels of skilled and sophisticated knowledge economy jobs. So if we don't have reliable and objective measures of somebody's performance and we don't know what somebody is actually contributing to a team or organization, that's your output data, it's very challenging to create ethical and accurate AI because all we can do is to train the algorithms to predict things like promotability, career success, and if you're training algorithms to predict who gets promoted in a certain organization, it shouldn't surprise us that the algorithms would not just end up emulating human biases, but scaling them. And we've all seen these cases of, Microsoft or Amazon training chatbots to predict who gets promoted in a certain team, and 80% of the times it was white middle-aged engineers that got promoted. Not because the chatbot is sexist or biased, not because the software engineers that develop the chatbot are sexist or biased, but because there is bias, endemic bias in the culture. People evaluate somebody more favorably if they belong to a group. So this is the biggest challenge, but we also know the solution, which is to de-bias evaluations of performance and train the algorithms to predict whether somebody will drive high engagement levels in the team, whether somebody will have a team that is productive, whether morale, retention, and even inclusiveness is high in somebody's team. And then you start removing the influence of humans rating others, which, it's no different from having Google Maps or Waze telling us to go right when we want to go left. A lot of times it will be a process and a change in mindset, but that's the solution.
Okay, so it sounds rather cut and dry, but do you at some point have to train the people who are training the algorithm? I mean, you mentioned that human bias can get in the way, but is it as cut and dry as that? As you train the algorithm to reduce bias, and there we go. Or do you have to? The person who is doing this also has to have a certain amount of information.
Yeah, the people to design ethical AI, you need competent and ethical humans that are supervised and who are managed in the same way you should manage any employee. It is true, Yuval Harari made this point that AI is now so complex that you need to have teams where you have people who specialize in technology, in data science, in psychology, in business, probably in ethics, and in the legal side of things, in ESG. And that's what we do. We have teams that are interdisciplinary, and you have to look at all the different angles and perspectives. Now, importantly, the people who are actually programming the algorithms, they don't need to be unbiased. I mean, if they're humans, they're never going to be unbiased.
Right.
They need to pay attention to the outcomes of the process. So I might be programming these algorithms in AI, and I might have my own opinions about humanity, women, men, and different kind of demographic groups. But if I'm measured on the basis of improving certain outcomes, if I'm measured on whether the recruitment improves diversity, improves performance, improves engagement, improves even ESG and the desirability of my brand, then my biases become irrelevant. I either do my job well or not.
Yeah. Are there any risks to using AI in the hiring process? I mean, could it get things wrong?
Of course. The risks are that if you don't audit and monitor the algorithms on a regular basis, a little thing that you might not have paid attention to will be amplified and scaled, right? It might be that, I don't know, imagine you're using video interview technology to hire people that are good salespeople. And after having thousands of people go through this software, that when salespeople say a certain word, they're more likely to be high performers in the future, right? It might be that people become aware of it, and that as soon as somebody knows, because they go on YouTube or the internet, that if you say the word, I don't know, fascinating, you'll be scored highly by AI. Everybody does it, and that then you very quickly, if you're not monitoring this and you're checking the data all the time, you can end up with an overrepresentation of false positives, and then everything can collapse. We also know that the candidate experience is not necessarily highly correlated with either the accuracy or the fairness of situations. Humans still prefer to be interviewed by other humans, even though that's generally more biased than being interviewed by a video interview software that has some human experts reviewing the algorithms, but algorithmic scoring. And fundamentally, you can end up in a situation where the algorithm is trained to identify correctly high-performing individuals, and that these high-performing individuals will belong to underrepresented groups and to groups that have historically been the target of prejudice and discriminated. But if they join a culture where managers still don't like those people and where supervisors or leaders are still biased, they're going to fail. And that's going to backfire not just in terms of the recruitment process, but also all the efforts to improve that. That's a classic case of if you have diversity without inclusion, it will backfire.
Yeah. So how does AI work in complement with the traditional hiring process? We still need humans. Yep. So how can they work together? So
most of the applications so far are to reduce the frictions and improve speed and reduce cost. The main examples today are resume parsing kind of algorithms or natural language process, for example, that can translate an interview into certain markers of potential. And you're adding consistency and reducing the cost and time of something that is tedious for recruiters to do, and that frees up the recruiters to actually focus on the stuff that AI is not good at focusing on, which is to have an holistic profile of the person, to put together things like what are the hard skills with what are the soft skills. The soft skills, we still mostly assess through science-based assessments, like a psychometric assessments. And I think fundamentally, humans are still there to provide an experience of the company, an experience of the culture, and to also answer the questions that interviewees or candidates might have. So in essence, we see AI and humans working in combination. We see data and AI augmenting humans, and humans very much verifying and augmenting AI. But the idea is that human recruiters move towards a much more strategic role where they're operating more as career coaches and actually there to provide a human and a humane experience in the hiring process. But we want to de-risk and de-bias everything that can be done with data at the forefront, basically.
Right. And just one last question, where does this leave the CV? Do we need it anymore?
The CV in a way has died already because people look at your LinkedIn profile and they look at your online reputation, etc. I think it's not so much about the CV, but it's about the role of educational credentials. Because most of the stuff we report in the CV that has value, especially in an early career stage, is your educational credentials. And having access to an Ivy League education or to a Grande École or these things is conflated with privilege. If we can find people who are as smart, as hardworking, and as honest, and not go through the same, privileged places and not rely on institutions that function very much as certifiers, not just of talent, but also of wealth, then you can include diversity, you can increase diversity and inclusion on a much bigger scale. And I think we've heard employers been saying for 10 years, we don't hire from the usual places, we don't care about the CV, but they still largely do. We need this change to be driven from the businesses so that you actually get people from different walks of life and who have different personalities, different values, while being not just as talented, but in many occasions more talented than the traditional people who are all the same.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Thomas Amorro-Premuzic, here at the Manpowergroup Lab.
Thank you.